There's a song in there. There's a song there. It's the words from our young people, our children. Everything I have to say is there. Many of these kids are in high school. Many of them are on suicide watch. They shouldn't be able to do things like that to me. But their message is their message. Their words are theirs. They have a voice. We've been waiting for them. Our young people are waking up. We have a future. We come from a small community, 3 communities in the central interior of this province. And we lose young ones to suicides, to drugs, to alcohol. It seems like our communities are in grief all the time. We're drawn in crisis many times. And we and they can't see why and what the source of that is. Why is it that the young children, the youth, behave the way they are? Until we understand the source of that trauma, it's really difficult to break the cycles that we run into. Three, 4 generations of our people went required by law to go into an Indian residential school, including myself. That school was designed to kill the Indian in us. Our language, our culture, our way of life, disconnect us from our parents, grandparents, our extended family, our relatives, community, our songs, our drums, our land. We don't know how deep that trauma is, but we know it's there. And we fight to seek solutions. And these young ones here, despite the challenges, are resilient, standing up. They came to our council meeting one day, early in January. We want to be involved, they told us. We want to know what's going on in our communities. We want to help. We want to help. The only thing we could think of was, thank God our young ones are waking up. Thank God our young ones are standing up. We've been waiting for you. Where you're going to go, how far you're going to go, that depends on you, but we're going to be there to help you get there, to help you do that. The numbers of children in permanent care from my 3 communities are pretty high. Only now we're starting to see we turn to alcohol, we turn to drugs, we turn to religion, we're born again Christian, this and that. And what we are seeing now is that what really guided our elders in our past was strength. The source of their resilience was our connections to our lands, to our cultures, to where we come from. Knowing that we belong to a system of ways, our clan system, our Batlat system, what we inherited from our ancestors. We thought we could find solutions over there and everywhere else, because we were taught our ways were not very good, that it was inferior. As a prime minister said when he apologized for the residential schools in this country, we thought your ways were inferior. And he said we were wrong. We heard those words, but it couldn't register in our hearts, because many of our people were living through that grief, through the crisis. Many of our communities in this province are in the same place, day by day by day. Wake up this morning, community where I'm living with my wife, another young man, 21, died from fentanyl, downtown Vancouver. It just seems like every week, another burial, another more and more cycle of grief. But there are ways that they're being dealt with. Really think, I didn't think this video would affect me this way. I've seen it many times. This is where we call on governments, federal government, the provincial government, municipal governments, organizations like yours, to be able to reach out to you and for you to reach back a hand. We don't want you to find solutions for us. We want you to help us to find our solutions and work these out. I think that's where we find ourselves. Other people's solutions have never worked for us in our communities. We do need expertise, yes, to help guide us. We do need professional help as we need it and when we need it. But it's been a long time in coming. The apology by the Prime Minister didn't come by accident. 27 men and women who went to Port Alberni Indian Residential School went to court. A case called Blackwater. It ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada. The court held both the church and the government liable. And then began the discussions around, okay, what do we do in terms of settlement? What do we do in terms of the long term? One of the recommendations that the government adopted was to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look into the impacts of residential schools across this country. And They did a remarkable job. That picture there was the day before that big march. You remember it? Many of you may have been there. Thank you to Van City, helping make it happen. 75,000 people walking in the pouring rain in Vancouver. I'm sure many of you were there, and I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. It sent a message that we are connected. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to one fundamental conclusion, that Canada's laws, regulations, policies, practices amounted to cultural genocide. What does that mean, cultural genocide? To kill a people, to kill the spirit and the culture of peoples. That was the project from 1867, initially under Prime Minister John A. Macdonald. Laws were enacted that prohibited the cultural practices of our peoples, prohibited our gatherings, more than 10 people, required us to have permission to leave the reservation. That's a legacy of this country, one that I know many people may not understand now, but one which still has an enduring impact. So when the Supreme Court of Canada made the decision that it did, it really started breaking down that cycle that we were in. Truth and Reconciliation Commission made 94 recommendations or calls to action. You know, as strange as it is, there's 140 American lawyers and judges meeting downtown in a hotel. They invited me yesterday to ask, what's going on in Canada? Well, I said, I watched the State of the Union address and I can see what's going on over there. I heard the president talking about reaching out, but then I saw the brass knuckles there too, literally, figuratively. It took a while, eh? And so, one of the calls to action was for Canada to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I was really happy to hear the length of time it took for the Convention of the Rights of the Child to be adopted very quickly. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People took 27 years. We never understood why, but we think we know why. For the very same reason that the Truth and Reconciliation talked about cultural genocide. Indigenous peoples globally facing that wave which we've managed to stop and hold right now, starting to turn the tide where and however we can. There's a resilience in our peoples, but the resilience is also in crisis in some ways and some places to certain depths. We're not out of the woods for sure, but I think all of our peoples in our communities have plans that we can, like these young people said, we can move forward. Why us, they asked. It's a good question. It's a very good question. Change is coming though, I really have to say. When I was asked to do the report on children and families, the status, I went to the communities. I was given a whole lot of binders. Minister Conroy, you weren't there then, but I was given these binders, laws and policies and regulations. Why are you giving me this? That's the reason why there's so many kids in care. Why should I want it? So I put them aside and went to the people in the communities and asked them what they were thinking, what they thought. They didn't understand the volumes of policies or regulations or legislation. They don't know that. All they know that their children are being removed. Minister Philpott, the federal minister for the Department of Indigenous Services, and they have an office here, DISCO we call it. She said upon her return in December from a visit to Manitoba, we held a rally on Parliament Hill, and she came along, and Minister Bennett. And Minister Philpott said, there is a humanitarian crisis. Those words, humanitarian crisis, we associate with Africa, third world countries, developing countries. She said, babies were being born in this hospital, and over there were the social workers from the government waiting to take that child. The numbers were staggering. 90% of all the children in care in Manitoba are Indigenous children. 8% of the children in this country are Indigenous. Yet 52% of all the children in care are Aboriginal, Indigenous children. When I looked at the word crisis, he called it a humanitarian crisis. My thinking, I said to the minister, I said, you're seeing the tip of the iceberg here. This crisis that you see is only the tip of the iceberg. Start looking below that. You were saying that 1 in 5 children lives in poverty. Take that number and put it onto our reserves, our communities. The number is going to be quite different. I don't know what those numbers are, but I know that in my communities up north, they're very high. We have corporate interests who are mining in our territories or taking timber down from our lands, our homelands. They're not hiring our people. These young people graduating, where are they going to find work? What kind of work are they going to do? Those jobs are not there because somebody else in a town or city nearby where these contractors come from, those people need work, so they bring them in. So we're left on the outside while they're taking trees down from our territories. See, we want to change that. And that's part of the commitment behind the federal government's adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the provincial government as well, adopting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It provides a framework for addressing and understanding the critical problems that we're dealing with, that are structurally embedded in the political system we have, in the constitutions that we have, and in the laws that we have. Let me give you one simple example. The Child and Welfare, the Children's Legislation, Child and Family Services Act, has a provision in there that says where a child is removed, you must protect the child's cultural integrity, the child's cultural heritage, the words. That's a legislation, reflects what the Convention of the Rights of the Child says. You follow that to the policies, the regulations and the policies that kind of breathe life into the law, into the legislation, and then you come to the child's care plan. Every child, you need to have a care plan for that child in practice. Now tell me what you will find about the child's cultural heritage in that care plan. These are care plans developed under the authority of the Director for Child Welfare. These are social workers who develop these plans. And the majority, vast majority of the social workers, non-Aboriginal. What are they going to put in the care plan about that child's culture or that child's language if they don't know what it is that they could include? It's silent there. So we have a story from one of our leaders in Alberta. They have a traditional ceremony called a blanket exercise, teaching the cultural ways. There was 24 Filipino foster parents, 1 black foster parent, 1 white foster parent. And when they were done, this is what story came to me. That the 24 parents went to the coordinator, the cultural teacher, and said to, "Thank you very much for what you're telling us. But we're going to teach those kids to learn Filipino language. We're going to teach them about Filipino culture, and we're going to teach them about Catholicism." See, the residential school, I went to a Catholic residential school. Others went to Anglican residential schools. Others went to different denominations of schools. And what they taught us was about religion, about Catholicism, learning Latin. Tell me what's different between the two, because I can't see anything. And if the child welfare system is doing the same thing that the residential schools are doing, we're no further ahead. So those young people, when they age out, when they turn 19 or they become adults, where are they going to go? What language are they going to speak? What culture are they going to know about? We all know that they come back to our communities looking for their siblings, their parents, their families, their extended family, who they are, where they come from. The law disconnects the child from all of that. So that law should change. So that child is never disconnected from the mother or the father, extended family, or the community. When I listened, like I went to a residential school and I know all about this disconnection and what it was like. We were absolutely powerless. We were kids. Absolutely powerless. We had no one to turn to. No one. In that institution. These children in care, in many cases, are in the same place. You know, I'm not suggesting for a minute that there are not many families who do really good care for these children. I think they do. I mean, I've heard amazing stories in the care for kids. The one that broke my heart was this one when I traveled up into the Lillooet country. Grandmother looking for a granddaughter. She was told by ministry officials, "We don't know where that baby is." And then that child was placed in foster care, and the foster parents were told nobody wants this baby. So they were really happy. Now they had a child that they could raise as their own, and they loved that little girl to pieces. But then one day, somehow, the grandmother found that granddaughter. And she came and told us her story, so I told and Chu, some of you know, maybe know, he's one of those regional executive directors, I think they're called, in the Fraser Valley. I said, Holden, that grandmother wants that grandchild. See what we can do there. As I didn't wait until the end of my report to do all of this. As we were going along, we were troubleshooting, as it were. And so lo and behold, one day I get a call from the chief, Ed, we're having a celebration. That little girl's coming back to the grandmother. Can you come? So I dropped everything. I was there the next day. I went there. They had a ceremony. The little girl was in the Shawinigan territory, Shuswap, over in Cache Creek area. And Lillooet is in Statlium territory, is a different tribe altogether. So they picked up that little girl and they stopped at the border between the Shuswap people and the Statlium people and sang a song of welcome back to territory to the girl, to welcome her back to her homeland. And then when they brought her to the arbor, the powwows, they had songs and ceremonies there as well. And as I watched from my where I was sitting, the foster parents were here, and the grandparents were here, and that little girl was running back and forth. You could tell she loved both her grandparents and her foster parents, and you could see the love between the foster parent and that little girl. And she was being returned to the grandmother. I thought this little girl is going to be good because she's going to have two sets of parents, well, grandparents and foster parents, even though they're not going to be there every day. But it was really heartbreaking to see that. And then the lawyer in me, something stuck out. I said to Holden, I said, I want you to tell me when this child is transferred to the grandmother, I want a one-page briefing note. Holden, I don't want 20 pages. I want you to tell me in one page what the grandmother will be paid to care for that child. And I want you to tell me what that foster parents are being paid to care for this child. A few days later, I get a half-a-page memo. The grandmother was being paid $1,200 a month less. Same thing. Talk about, that's the discriminatory practices I'm talking about. So the recommendation was to create equity there in the report. You know, one lady that I'm very proud of here is Melanie, and her young daughter that's carving up the rug up here, Michaela. Her story is absolutely amazing. I mean, you know it, I'm sure. But how one who understands that system intimately, being involved in many different ways with respect to child welfare system, remarkable what she's doing now as the Minister of Advanced Education and giving hope to those young ones who need post-secondary education. I want to thank you so much. Today, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal issued another order under a case that was brought against the federal government under the Human Rights Act. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decided that Canada's policies and regulations were discriminatory. Thank you. And made orders to end the discrimination. 2016, January, just about now, 2 years ago. Geez, 2 years already, and we're still waiting. Human Rights Tribunal today made orders to the government of Canada, which they responded to very quickly. They had an embargoed copy of the decision embargoed to them on December 18th, I think, that they were able to issue statements that fall very much in line with what the tribunal decided. And I think it is the time to act. The tribunal said this: This case is vital because this case is vital because it deals with mass removal of children. Mass removal of children. There is urgency to act and to prioritize the elimination of the removal of their children from their families and communities. An urgency. This is what we are faced with, and I'm hoping that through your organizations, the 100 members of your coalition, that you can really provide strong advice to the government to act, to make the changes that are so fundamentally required in this province so that children can remain with their parents. We have a system here that has to be turned on its head. Parents whose children are being removed, communities, extended family. When a child is removed, that child ends up having to be presented to the court within a period of days. Now, all of a sudden, the shift is for the parents, when that child is removed, the parents to show that they're fit, or the community is fit to care for these children. The government, on the other hand, has the resources, social workers, and the infrastructure and lawyers to do their bidding. Turn it on its head. If you want to remove a child, get a court order first. And keep the onus on the government, not on the parents. It's a simple fix in the legislation. That was one of the recommendations that I made. Not complex recommendations, simple ones. So there's a song in every child's heart. And we need our children in our communities, to be able to sing their songs with their drums. And they should be entitled to do that. And they should be encouraged to do that. To be proud of who they are and the songs of their ancestors. And there's beautiful songs that come from the mountains. My sister-in-law talked about the mountain and that there was no name on it. I attended at Prime Minister Trudeau's funeral. He changed his views and put in provisions in the Constitution that respect and recognize and affirm the rights of our people. It took us a long time to get the governments, not through their own volition, but through the courts, countless court decisions. So I'm sitting in my community, I'm looking across the street, across the lake to the mountain we call Nutnatisha. Shas the grizzly bear heading west, the prayer mountain for prayers. It's a sacred mountain. To the west I look, I see another mountain held by the Frog clan. A sacred place for the cultures of our people in this tribe who has responsibilities in that area. And I look to the north behind me and I see Deneza, High Chief. In the traditional ways of our people, the hereditary chiefs and the responsibilities. Then I look to the east, to the mountain to the east, we call Nakalto, and inside the mountain lives the little people. The stories, the legends, the stories behind who these little people are and how they survived in our territory but made their home inside the mountain. Those names, those mountains all have names. They all have stories behind them. When someone does not understand this, it's really difficult, so patient, running out of patience. But we have to be patient because our children depend on it. Why us, they asked us. You know, I have to say to Rafi, you bring joy into the hearts of our children, our grandchildren. What a special gift that is. And it is something that we can count on, because we see all of these things that are hard to deal with. Maybe there's no breakfast in the morning, or maybe there's no meal at night, or maybe not even a bed to sleep on. But that joy needs to be encouraged in each and every one of those children. And that's the kind of joy that you've given to all children in this country for so long, and we have to be thankful for your contribution. I'm really happy to be here today with you as we honor you for the tremendous contribution that you have made to all of us. Thank you. What we should have is a crisis of joy in this country. So thank you very much.